My name is Sadie Mercer and I was 29 years old, sitting in a hospital room watching my husband breathe through a machine when his mother drove to the insurance company's regional office and changed the beneficiary on his $900,000 life insurance policy. She did it on a Tuesday. Joel had gone into the coma on a Monday. I did not know she had done it. I did not know it was possible to do it. I did not know that a life insurance beneficiary designation could be changed by anyone other than the policyholder, and I did not know that the specific policy Joel had carried since he was 24 had a spousal consent clause that his mother had somehow navigated around with a document I had never signed and a notary stamp I had never seen. I found out 14 months later when Joel died and the check arrived. Not to me, to her. Before I tell you what happened next, please hit like and subscribe. Drop your city and local time in the comments. I read every single one. Now let me take you back to where this really started. Not to the hospital, not to the insurance office. Further back, to a woman named Darlene Mercer and the 13 years she spent making sure her son understood that no one would ever love him the way she did. My husband Joel Mercer was the kind of man who apologized for things that weren't his fault. Not in a weak way. In the way of someone who had been taught very early that keeping the peace was his responsibility and had internalized that lesson so completely it had become indistinguishable from his personality. He was kind. He was funny in the dry, understated way of people who are smarter than they let on. He fixed things around the house not because he enjoyed it but because he had grown up in a house where fixing things was the only language of care that was consistently available. He cooked on weekends. He remembered the names of my friends' children. He called his mother every Sunday without fail for the entire 7 years we were together. Every Sunday, without fail. Darlene Mercer was a woman who loved her son in the specific consuming way of mothers who have decided that loving completely means loving exclusively. She had raised Joel alone after his father left when Joel was 6. She had worked 2 jobs for 4 years to keep the house. She had sacrificed in real and documented ways that she referenced often enough that Joel had learned to carry her sacrifices alongside his own memories, as though they were his to bear. She was not a villain in the way that word is usually understood. She did not twirl. She did not scheme in the open. She was simply a woman who had decided, somewhere in the years of raising a son alone, that she was the primary relationship of his life and that anything which threatened that position was a threat to something sacred. I was a threat, not because I was unkind to her. I drove her to her eye appointments for 2 years when her cataracts made driving dangerous. I invited her to every holiday. I called her on her birthday and her anniversary of quitting smoking, which she observed every year with the seriousness of a religious holiday. I included her. I tried. She smiled at everything I did and then called Joel afterward and told him I was pulling him away from his family. I know this because Joel told me, not at the time, later. In the careful, honest way he had of eventually telling me things he had been holding for too long, usually at night, usually in the dark, usually with the specific exhaustion of a man who had been managing 2 women's feelings for so long he had forgotten what his own felt like. She wants me to choose, he said once. You don't have to choose, I said. He nodded. He looked at the ceiling. He did not say that he knew she would keep asking until he did. Joel was a construction project manager. He worked long hours and traveled occasionally and kept a meticulous calendar that I teased him about because it included things like call mom Sunday 7 p.m. blocked out in the same blue color as his site visits and his dentist appointments. He had taken out the life insurance policy at 24, 2 years before we met, when a colleague at his firm had died unexpectedly and the colleague's family had been left with nothing. Joel was not a man who left things unresolved. He updated the policy when we got married. He named me beneficiary. He showed me the document. He kept a copy in the filing cabinet in our home office in a folder labeled important, read first. I knew about the policy. I knew the amount. I knew my name was on it. What I did not know was that policies can be changed, and that some companies, in some circumstances, with some documentation, will process a beneficiary change without the current beneficiary's knowledge or consent. Joel's accident happened on a Wednesday morning in February. He was on a job site, doing a walkthrough of a structure that was 2 weeks from completion, when a section of temporary scaffolding gave way. The fall was 22 feet. He was airlifted to St. Marcus Medical Center. By the time I arrived, he was in surgery. He came out of surgery alive. The surgeons used words like significant brain trauma and medically induced coma, and we will know more in the coming days in the specific careful language of people who have learned not to make promises they cannot keep. The coming days became coming weeks. The coming weeks became months. I lived at that hospital in the way you live somewhere when leaving feels like abandonment. I brought my laptop and worked from the chair beside his bed when I could concentrate and stared at the wall when I couldn't. I learned the names of his nurses and his doctors and the physical therapist who came twice a week to move his limbs because the body must be maintained even when the mind is somewhere else. Darlene came every day for the first 3 weeks. She sat on the other side of his bed and held his hand and spoke to him in a low continuous murmur that I could never quite make out from where I was was sitting. She brought photographs. She brought the quilt from his childhood bedroom. She rearranged the objects on his bedside table without asking, and I did not say anything because she was his mother and he was in a coma, and there are some battles you understand immediately are not worth fighting. On day 8 she asked me whether I had thought about what would happen if Joel didn't recover. I told her I was not thinking about that yet. She said someone needed to think about it. I said that someone could think about it later and that right now I needed to focus on the fact that my husband was still alive. She nodded. She looked at Joel. She looked at me with an expression I have thought about many times since. Not cruel, not calculating, something more complicated. The expression of a woman who has already made a decision and is watching you from the other side of it. I did not understand what I was seeing. I understand it now. 3 days after that conversation, on a Tuesday, Darlene Mercer drove to the regional office of Consolidated Life and Benefit, the company that held Joel's policy. I did not know this happened until 14 months later. I am going to tell you now what I pieced together across those 14 months from insurance company records, a notary registry, a hospital visitor log, and one phone call from a woman named Kathy who worked the front desk at Consolidated's regional office and who called me 8 months after Joel died because she said she hadn't been able to stop thinking about it. Here's what happened on that Tuesday. Darlene arrived at the Consolidated office at 10:15 in the morning. She brought a folder. Inside the folder was a change of beneficiary form, already completed, listing herself as sole primary beneficiary. She also brought a document she described to the agent as a power of attorney, granting her authority to make financial decisions on Joel's behalf during his incapacitation. The power of attorney had been notarized. The notary stamp was registered to a man named Gerald Foss who operated a mobile notary service out of a van in the county. The agent who processed the request was a 23-year-old named Derek who had been working at Consolidated for 4 months. He reviewed the documents. He noted that the policy had a spousal consent clause, which typically requires the current beneficiary's signature for a beneficiary change. He flagged this to his supervisor. His supervisor, a woman who had been with Consolidated for 19 years and who Kathy described to me as someone who processed paper the way other people breathe, reviewed the power of attorney and made a determination. She decided that a valid power of attorney superseded the spousal consent requirement because the policyholder himself was incapacitated and therefore the POA holder had authority to act in his interest. The beneficiary was changed. My name came off the policy. Darlene's name went on. I was in Joel's hospital room at 10:15 on that Tuesday morning. I was reading to him from a novel we had been halfway through when the accident happened because his doctor had said familiar voices and familiar content were worth trying and I had decided to believe her. I was reading about fictional people navigating fictional problems and 40 minutes away his mother was removing me from the document that was supposed to take care of me if the worst happened. I want to ask you something. Have you ever been completely unaware of something that was happening to you? Not ignorant in the careless way. Unaware in the way of someone who was exactly where they were supposed to be, doing exactly what they were supposed to do, while something irreversible was being done in their absence? That was me. On a Tuesday in February, 40 minutes away, reading a novel out loud to a man who could not hear me yet. Or maybe he could. The doctors said maybe. Joel remained in the coma for 11 more months. I will not take you through all of it because some of it belongs only to me and some of it is too heavy to carry in a story. What I will tell you is that I was there every day, in the way that matters, not the performed way, not the photographed way, not the way you are present when there is an audience. The quiet daily way of someone who has decided that showing up is the only thing in their control and has organized their entire life around that one decision. Darlene continued to visit, less frequently after the first month, once a week by month 3, once every 2 weeks by month 6. She always brought something: flowers, food, a magazine she thought he might like when he woke up. She was kind to me in the surface way she had always been kind to me. She asked how I was sleeping. She offered to bring me food. She looked at me with the expression I had seen on day 11 and I still did not understand what I was looking at. Joel died on a Thursday morning in January, 14 months after the accident. His body had been working so hard for so long and then it simply stopped. The room was quiet. The monitor made its sound. I held his hand and I talked to him for a long time after because leaving felt like the thing I could not do. I called Darlene. She arrived within the hour. We sat on opposite sides of his bed in the quiet room and we were, for the first and only time in 13 years, simply 2 women who had lost the same person. That lasted about 3 days. The check arrived on a Friday 6 weeks after Joel's death. I know it arrived on a Friday because I was home. I had taken Fridays off work since the accident and had not yet resumed them because resuming them felt like admitting that the emergency was over and the emergency did not feel over. The envelope was from Consolidated Life and Benefit. I opened it because I had been expecting communication from them. I had filed the claim the week after Joel died. My name, my signature, the death certificate, everything the website said to include. The check was not made out to me. It was made out to Darlene and Mercer. I read her name 3 times. times. I turned the check over. I turned it back. I sat down on the kitchen floor because standing suddenly seemed like something that required more than I had available. $900,000. In her name. From a policy my husband had taken out at 24 to make sure I would be taken care of if the worst happened. The worst had happened. And I was sitting on a kitchen floor holding a check with someone else's name on it. I called the insurance company. I was on hold for 22 minutes. When I finally reached someone, I explained who I was. I explained that I was the policyholder's spouse. I explained that my name had been on that policy when we married. The representative told me the beneficiary had been changed 11 months ago. I asked when. She gave me the date. Day 11 of the Coma. A Tuesday in February. I sat on that kitchen floor for a long time after I hung up. Long enough for the afternoon light to move across the room and go gold and start to fade. Long enough for the thing I was feeling to travel from shock through something colder and more useful. Then I stood up. I put the check on the counter. And I called the only attorney I knew by name. And what she told me was the beginning of the end of what Darlene Mercer thought she had gotten away with. The attorney I called was a woman named Frances Obi who had handled the closing on our house 3 years earlier and who I called not because she specialized in insurance disputes but because she was the only attorney whose number I had saved in my phone and because I needed to hear a professional voice tell me whether what I was feeling was reasonable or whether I had somehow missed something that would explain the check with Darlene's name on it. Frances listened to everything I told her without interrupting. When I finished, she was quiet for 4 seconds. Then she said, "Sadie, this is not your area and it is not entirely mine either, but what you are describing sounds like insurance fraud and possibly elder financial abuse used as a mechanism. I need you to not cash that check. I need you to photograph everything. And I need you to call Rebecca Marsh tomorrow morning first thing." Rebecca Marsh was an insurance litigation attorney. Frances texted me her number before we hung up. I did not sleep that night. I lay in the bed that still smelled like Joel and I stared at the ceiling and I thought about Darlene on day 11 sitting across his bed from me asking whether I had thought about what would happen if he didn't recover. She had already been thinking about it. She had thought about it so specifically and so practically that she had sourced a mobile notary, filled out a change of beneficiary form, and driven to the regional office of Consolidated Life and Benefit before I had even begun to consider the possibility that Joel might not come back to me. I thought about what that required. Not cruelty, exactly. Something more organized than cruelty. The specific cold practicality of a woman who had decided that her son's death, if it came, would not leave her behind. Rebecca Marsh had an office that smelled like good coffee and serious work. She was 51 years old with reading glasses she wore on top of her head until she needed them and a manner that made you feel immediately that the situation, however bad, was now being handled by someone who had seen worse and prevailed. She reviewed everything I brought. The policy documents, the death certificate, the check, the correspondence from Consolidated, the date of the beneficiary change. She asked me one question first. "Did your husband ever discuss giving his mother power of attorney?" "No," I said. "We had talked about doing our own POA documents together. We had an appointment scheduled with an estate attorney for the spring after the accident. It was on his calendar." In blue. She nodded. She wrote something down. She said, "The power of attorney Darlene used to change the beneficiary. Do you have any knowledge of it being executed before the accident?" I had never seen it. I had never heard Joel mention it. I had gone through every document in our filing cabinet in the weeks after the accident looking for insurance information and I had not found any power of attorney document granting his mother authority over his financial affairs. Rebecca said, "If the power of attorney was executed after Joel lost consciousness, it is invalid. A person cannot grant power of attorney while incapacitated. The document would need to have been signed by Joel before the accident to be legally effective." I said, "He went into the coma on Monday. She changed the beneficiary on Tuesday." Rebecca looked at me over her reading glasses. She said, "I need you to find out exactly when that power of attorney was notarized. The notary registry is a public record." Rebecca's paralegal pulled Gerald Foss's notary log within 48 hours. Gerald Foss had notarized a document for Darlene and Mercer on a Monday evening. The same Monday Joel was airlifted to St. Marcus. The same day he went into a coma from which he would not emerge for 14 months. Joel had been unconscious for approximately 6 hours by the time Gerald Foss's stamp went onto that document. Rebecca said 3 words when her paralegal brought her the registry record. "There it is. Here is what the investigation uncovered across the following 4 months, and I am going to tell you this clearly because I think you deserve to understand exactly what had been done." Darlene had contacted Gerald Foss on the Monday evening, hours after Joel's accident. She had told him she needed an emergency POA notarized for her son who had been in an accident. Gerald Foss, who charged $75 for mobile notary services and asked very few questions, had driven to a location Darlene specified, not the hospital, a parking lot of a diner 2 miles from her house, and had notarized a document that purported to be a power of attorney signed by Joel Mercer. Joel Mercer had been unconscious in a hospital bed at the time his signature appeared on that document. The signature, when compared by a forensic document examiner to samples of Joel's actual handwriting from our mortgage documents, our marriage certificate, and his work contracts, was determined to be inconsistent with his authentic signature in 17 specific characteristics. Darlene had forged her son's signature on a power of attorney the night he went into a coma. She had then used that forged document to remove his wife's name from a $900,000 life insurance policy. Rebecca filed a civil complaint against Consolidated Life and Benefit for wrongful processing of a beneficiary change and against Darlene Mercer for fraud, forgery, and intentional interference with an inheritance expectancy. She also referred the criminal elements of the case to the district attorney's office. I want to be honest with you about what the months after Rebecca filed felt like, because they were not triumphant and they were not simple, and they were happening at the same time as grief, which does not pause for legal proceedings regardless of how much you need it to. I was also, during this period, dealing with Darlene in the way you deal with someone who has done something this significant and has not yet been held accountable for it. She called me twice after the complaint was filed. The first call she cried and said she had only been trying to protect Joel's legacy for his real family. The second call she was cold and told me her attorney had advised her not to speak with me. I did not respond to either call. Rebecca had advised me not to, and I had learned by then to do exactly what Rebecca told me. Marcus, Joel's cousin who had been close to him since childhood, called me the week after the complaint was filed. He had found out what Darlene had done through a family chain that had apparently been discussing it since the check arrived. He called to tell me that 3 other family members had reached out to him with their own accounts of Darlene's behavior over the years, financial requests that had been made under pressure, money that had been borrowed and not returned, a pattern that people had noticed and discussed privately and never confronted directly because she was Joel's mother and Joel loved her, and that had always been enough of a reason to stay quiet. He said, "Sadie, I'm sorry nobody said anything sooner." I said, "I know. I understand why." I did understand. I had stayed quiet for 7 years for the same reason. The deposition was the hardest part. I sat in a conference room and answered questions for 4 hours about my marriage, my relationship with Darlene, Joel's relationship with Darlene, our finances, our insurance, our estate planning conversations. I answered everything honestly and completely because the truth was the only thing I had that Darlene didn't, and I was not going to soften any edge of it. Darlene's deposition was taken separately. I was not in the room. Rebecca was. She told me afterward that Darlene had been composed for the first 2 hours and then had begun to contradict herself in ways that the transcript would make very clear. She had claimed Joel had always intended for her to have the policy. She had claimed he had discussed it with her. She had claimed the power of attorney had been prepared in advance and that Joel had signed it before the accident, but that the notarization had been delayed due to Gerald Foss's schedule. Gerald Foss, when deposed, said he had been contacted by Darlene on the Monday evening and had met her that same night. He had not previously prepared or reviewed any document for the Mercer family. He had notarized what was put in front of him. He had not, he admitted, verified that the signature on the document matched the person named in the document. He had notarized it based on Darlene's representation that it was her son's signature. Rebecca described his deposition to me as a man who had slowly understood over 4 hours exactly what he had participated in and had decided that full cooperation was his best available option. Consolidated Life and Benefit settled 8 months after Rebecca filed the complaint. Their position, communicated through their attorney in language that was carefully neutral, was that they had processed the beneficiary change in good faith based on documentation presented to them, that their agent had followed standard protocol, and that they did not admit wrongdoing. What they did was write a check to me for the full policy amount, $900,000. I sat in Rebecca's office when she told me the settlement had been reached, and I felt something I had not expected to feel. Not joy, not relief exactly, something quieter. The specific exhale of a person who has been holding their breath for so long they have forgotten what breathing normally feels like. The criminal referral to the district attorney resulted in Darlene being charged with forgery, fraud, and insurance fraud. Gerald Foss was charged with notarial misconduct. Both cases proceeded through the criminal court separately from the civil settlement. I am not going to tell you the exact outcome of the criminal proceedings because those records are public, and this story is not about punishment. It is about what happened and what it cost and what it gave back. What I will tell you is that Darlene stood in a courtroom and heard a judge read a list of things she had done on the night her son went into a coma, and whatever she felt in that moment, whatever accounting she made of it, is between her and whatever she believes in. I was not in the courtroom. I had said everything I needed to say in a deposition room 8 months earlier. I did not need to watch the ending to know that it had ended. Kathy from Consolidated's front desk called me the week after the settlement was announced. She had seen my name in the local business reporting on the case. She said she had been thinking about me since the day Darlene had walked into the office, and she had watched from the front desk and something had felt wrong to her, but she hadn't known known what to do with that feeling. I told her she had done something by calling me 8 months after Joel died. That call had given me Darlene's name on a timeline. That timeline had given Rebecca a starting point. Kathy said she was glad she had called. I told her it mattered more than she knew. I want to tell you about the folder in our home office filing cabinet. The one Joel labeled important, read first. I opened it the week after the settlement. Not because I needed anything from it. Because I needed to sit with it. Inside was the policy document with my name on it. Our marriage certificate. A copy of his will, which had not been changed and which left everything to me in the straightforward, uncomplicated way of a man who had organized his toolbox by type and kept his calendar in blue and believed that taking care of the people you loved was a matter of preparation and follow-through. There was also a handwritten note in his handwriting on a piece of paper folded in half. I don't know when he wrote it. It was not dated. It said simply, "If something happens to me, everything here is yours. You know where everything is. You always know where everything is." He was right. I did know. I had always known. Because I had been the one who organized the filing cabinet. Because I had been the one who updated the address with the insurance company when we moved. Because I had been the one who read the policy document when we got married and noted the spousal consent clause and thought, good, that protects both of us, and then filed it away in the folder labeled important, read first. I knew where everything was. I just hadn't known I would need to fight for it. I kept the note. It is in my wallet now, folded the same way he folded it. I don't open it often, but I know exactly where it is. Joel fixed things. He organized his calendar in blue. He called his mother every Sunday without fail. He loved people in the careful, methodical way of someone who had learned that love was a form of maintenance and had decided to be diligent about it. He could not fix what his mother did on the night he went into a coma. He didn't know it needed fixing. He was unconscious. He was somewhere I couldn't reach, and she was in a parking lot 2 miles from her house with a mobile notary and a form she had already filled out. But he had fixed it in advance. The way he fixed everything. The policy, the folder, the spousal consent clause, the note on the piece of paper folded in half. He had prepared for the version of events where something went wrong. And when something went very wrong, the preparation held. That is what I carry. Not the $900,000. Not the settlement. Not the outcome of the criminal proceedings. The note in my wallet. The folder in the filing cabinet. And the knowledge that the man I loved had organized his love for me the same way he organized everything else. By type. In order. So that when I needed to find it, it would be exactly where he left it. If you have ever had someone prepare for you quietly, without telling you, in the way that only becomes visible when you need it most, I want to hear about it. Tell me in the comments. I read every single one. And if this story stayed with you, share it with someone who needs to hear that the people who love us carefully leave traces, and those traces hold. Hit subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.